Live. So, well, hey everyone! It is 7 o'clock, and you are on Wondering Wednesdays with Marna, and I'm glad that you found us. I'm glad that you're here with us, with me. I wanted to start tonight by telling you that my children are cooking dinner tonight. So I'm just sitting here wafting, like smelling the wonderful food that's coming out of the kitchen, and I just love that my boys know how to cook. So this is a cozy space. Welcome. We're glad that you're here, and I'm glad you're here and that we share this Wednesdays together. I wanted to encourage you that when you come to Wondering Wednesdays, we're going to continue this through the Christmas season. Who knows if we'll do Epiphany. I want you to bring your cup of tea with you. Bring something warm and cozy. Maybe put on something soft or have your blanket near you or whatever it is that makes you feel relaxed and cozy, because this is not a hard space. It's not a fast moving space. It's a cozy space. I've got my Advent wreath lit behind me, and we're going to spend some time today. I've been really excited about today because today is about the women. Today is about Mary and Elizabeth, and I love talking about Mary and Elizabeth and wondering about Mary and Elizabeth. We are really glad you're here, and if you say hello in the comments, we'll know you're here, and we'll see each other in the comments. It's really nice to know that we're not alone in our own little houses as we're looking at our screens. So feel free to say hey to everybody. And as I keep talking, the comments will come up and everybody can see each other. So I want to remind you about wondering. I want to remind you what we've talked about the last couple of weeks. I want to remind you that wondering is putting the mind behind the heart. That wondering is a time of using our senses and entering into wondering, entering to a place of quiet and gentleness. It's a time of not pushing, not figuring things out. Wondering is a receptive activity. And wondering is a kind of thing that is not oriented towards accomplishment. And last week we talked about entering into wondering through story. And what was really fun this week is that I had a couple of people share with me who they were in the Christmas story. They had a couple of people say, hey, I'm really drawn to this person or that person. And actually, one of the people on wrote a little mini play about Joseph and the innkeeper that was so delightful. And so feel free to share afterwards and, email or call or whatever, or leave another comment in the Facebook page just to interact with the material that we have. I want to leap in today to the women, and I want to leap into how do we talk about, how do we think about, how do we wonder about and ponder about Mary and Elizabeth. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what it's another characteristic of wondering. And another characteristic of wondering is that it is receptive. Wondering is when one gets into a set place, like I'm trying for us all to get to in Advent, it is really a place of receiving. It's a place where we cast our bread upon the waters and wait to see what's coming back to us. And as I was going through the week this week, something happened to me that I think is a really good metaphor for what this process of wondering, of wonder, and is like. I was out at Mayer doing my grocery shopping, and I was coming home, and it was dark. It was after 5, and I don't know the roads yet very well because I'm new to the area. And I saw ahead of me on the road, that there was the lights of an accident. There was a couple of fire engines, there was a police, but it must have just happened. So I had just gotten on that stretch, and I was kind of stuck in traffic, and I thought, oh, well, I guess I'm going to be stuck here for a while. And then you know how cars move around each other. And there was a line of cars that was making its way through a parking lot. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to follow these cars. And when I didn't know if it was a road, I didn't see it. It was dark. I couldn't see. And I realized that it was a parking lot. And as I'm following them into the parking lot, I thought, well, I don't know where I am. I have no idea where I am. And then I saw that they were going out the back of the parking lot and into a neighborhood. And I thought, okay, I guess I'm following them. And it was darker, and the neighborhood was dark, and the cars were just going through the neighborhood. And all I could do was follow, because I had no idea where I was going. I didn't know whether it would take me home or not, but I was just following in the dark. And as I was following in the dark, we came across this house that was so decorated for Christmas. It was dark, 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 dark. And then there was this moment where there was this just beautiful house decorated for Christmas, and it felt like fairyland in the middle of all this darkness. And I was so delighted to see this fairyland. And then I followed, and eventually it got me right where I needed to go on the main road back to civilization. And I got home. And when I got back on the road, I thought, this is exactly what the spiritual life is like. This is what the kind of intuitive, receptive spiritual life is like. We're tootling along, and something happens. We try actually to get ourselves off the road a little bit. But when we're there, it sometimes feels lost, and we don't know where we're going, and we don't know if we'll ever get back to the main highway again. We don't know if we'll ever really rejoin. But along the way, lovely surprises happen, like that beautiful house that was just lit up for Christmas. It just happened. And it has rested with me all week about that. That's really how this process feels. It feels like going into the dark and trusting the guide in front. Like I was just trusting the guide in front. And in a minute, I promise we'll talk about Mary, and we're going to do some things with Mary. I don't have any arts and crafts to show you today. I'm a little behind on my coloring. I have colored a little bit more, but I've had a busy week because I've been cooking. I've been making Christmas cookies for my dad and mom, who are 91 and 92. Shh, don't tell them, because I just mailed it today. So if you know them, don't tell them. They're going to get cookies from me. But my mom's too old to make cookies, and my dad never learned. And I mean, he can cook, but he isn't in charge of Christmas cookies. So that's where all my creative energy has gone this week. It hasn't gone into arts and crafts or writing or any of that. But I wanted to tell you something another thing that happens with wondering, and that's that I try to find companions. And I want to show you some books that have been my companions in learning about the feminine nature, because that's what we're going to talk today about. Mary and Elizabeth are the women, and I love talking about them. But I want to introduce you to, and I'm sure that you have some on your bookshelf, but I thought I'd share a few of mine and tell you why I love these folks so much, in case you want some companions on the way. First, I'm going to say hi. Hi from Deb and Kathy. Yay, I'm glad you're here. And Lynn, I've been looking forward to this too a lot. So I'm glad you're here with us, and everybody else that's around. There's this one book called The Feminine Face of God. And it was written a number of years ago, because I've had it for a while. And when is it? I can't see when it was published. 1981. The Unfolding of the Sacred in Women. And this is a bunch of interviews that were done by women, that the authors went and interviewed a bunch of women about their experience of the feminine in God. And it's a great pick-me-up book for me. Yay. Hi, Arlene and Kathy. This book by Sue Monk Kidd, The Secret Life of Bees, is Sue Monk Kidd wrote a lot of books about spirituality, about spiritual direction. And then she started writing novels. And this Secret Life of Bees book is really a book if you want to know about women being together. It's a great story. I try to read it every year. A book that I read just recently for the second time is Anita Diamant, wrote The Red Tent. And as you know, it's the telling of the story of the Old Testament through the eyes of the women. And it's really lovely. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute when I talk about the Mary and Elizabeth story. And the last book is this book by my good friend Jerusalem Greer. And it may not seem like, well, Jerusalem has this book about how do you go through the liturgical year making things and baking things. And it's got recipes and it's got arts and crafts activities. And I've never done one activity in this book. I have not cooked one recipe in this book, and I've owned it since it came out. So I don't take this book as a companion to me because I do the things in it, but because of her stories. And when I read her stories, I feel like I'm sitting in her kitchen. When she introduces an activity or she talks about her love for the liturgical year, I feel like I'm in her kitchen drinking a cup of tea. And one of the things that I think women do really well, and this is going to be a little gender specific tonight, I think women gather community together really well, and they are community to one another. And so when I read Jerusalem's book, I feel like I'm sitting in her kitchen, having a cup of coffee, having a cup of tea with her. And like I said, next week, make your cup of tea and come with you. Because we're going to talk about women, I want to talk a little bit about what I do to take care of myself. Because one of the challenges of being a woman in our society, and I can't speak for all the challenges of being a man. I'm raising 3 sons, and I have 3 brothers, and I have a lot of buddies who are men, but I can't from my being talk about the challenges of being a man because I'm not one. But one of the challenges of being a woman is finding time for ourselves and making time to ourselves, especially if we're taking care of aging parents, or if we're raising children, or if we're trying to juggle a household. It's very hard to make time for ourselves and to settle down enough to get away from the adrenaline that runs our lives. And I made this cup of tea so that I could encourage you to make tea for yourselves. But as I'm sitting here, I realize that this is my wild sweet orange tea. And I love the smell of it. And I actually have essential oil that's orange, and I put it on myself. And even though sometimes I have hectic weeks where I can hardly find a minute, it feels like, to myself to settle down, having these little things that connect with my senses, like some oils to put on or some tea to drink, low cost, high return kind of investments. And I try to teach my boys to do the same thing, because it's not easy being a man in this world either. There's a lot of really harsh realities and expectations put on them as well. And I try to teach them to take good care of themselves and to do gentle things for themselves as well. Okay, here we go. Mary and Elizabeth and women. I rented this house, and I think I told you how much I love this house because it's so feminine, the energy. I want to show you this beautiful picture that was on my wall when I got here. Is that not the most beautiful expression of women together? Do you see that pregnant woman? That pregnant woman has become Mary to me. That beautiful pregnant woman waiting to give birth, waiting to gestate, waiting for the gestation to be done and for her to hold her baby. So I want to talk tonight about receptivity. I want to talk about receiving and how receptivity is a cousin of wondering. Pondering and receptivity are the 2 things I want to talk about tonight. But receptivity means paying attention to kind of what's out there and letting it come to you. as I was thinking of Mary and Elizabeth this week, what came to me out of the blue was a podcast that my niece sent me, that Brene Brown did an interview with, I'm going to read their names, Gina Chavez and Carrie Rodriguez. She did it back in the summer, so why would Erin send it to me now? She just happened to send it to me. I knew I needed to listen. And I asked Erin, I said, why are you sending this to me? And she said, because they're so brave and they're so strong, these women. And in the interview, there's a point where Carrie Rodriguez says, as a woman, I'm so tired of being told that I don't matter, that my voice doesn't matter, that we were silenced as women. And these are young women. They're in their 30s. Maybe they're in their 30s, maybe early 40s. And she talks about how she had done this breakthrough moment in her singing, and that it was a leap of faith to do what she did, but it was this strengthening of her voice. And she said, I just felt like I'm so frustrated by being held back just because I'm a woman. So I heard that and I thought, what does this have to do with Mary and Elizabeth? And then I was encouraged or reminded of the movie Little Women. I don't know if you've seen the new Little Women that came out last year, but it's stunning. And I have read Little Women every year pretty much since the time I was 10 years old. So I know that book back and forward. And there was a part that was put in there, and Meryl Streep is in the movie. And I read about this speech that I'm going to tell you about, that it was Meryl Streep who encouraged it to be put in there. And it was about that time period that Little Women was written. And the youngest daughter, Amy, in the book, she is marrying for money. And I'm trying to remember, Laurie, who eventually becomes her husband, makes fun of her for wanting to marry rich. And she says, marriage is an economic proposition. For women, if I even made money, which I can't, once the moment I got married, it would be my husband's. And if I have children, they're not mine, they're my husband's property. So don't tell me that marriage is not an economic proposition. So then I realized about Mary and Elizabeth, that often we think of Mary, and I'm going to tell you what I love about Mary now. What we often think of Mary is her obedience to God. But I hadn't really thought about the risk that she was taking with her own life. Marriage back then was not, oh, I'm going to fall in love like Hollywood and find a husband, and we're going to fall in love and we're going to convince our parents and it's okay. Marriage was a social construct. So when an arrangement was made between Mary and Joseph's families so that Mary would marry Joseph, she was supposed to go there in a particular condition, and pregnant was not that condition. And so when Joseph was going to put her away quietly, as the scripture says, that meant that he had the right to cast her out into economic situations that were not stable. And she could have really been in trouble. And yet we know the story that he didn't do that. But when Mary said yes to the angel, she was saying yes to more than birthing a baby. She was saying yes to taking those risks. I don't know if you remember the story, but Mary says yes. And then she is told by the angel that her kinswoman Elizabeth is also pregnant, Elizabeth being old to have a baby, and that she's in her 6th month. And then Mary goes to spend 3 months with Elizabeth. We can all do the math. So Mary, who is just pregnant, gets to be with Elizabeth, who's at the end of her pregnancy, for 3 months. Think about those times in pregnancy. The first 3 months you're nauseous, you're tired, your body's changing as a woman, and you can lose the baby. It's the most sort of scary time of not the most scary, the whole thing is scary, but you can lose a baby in the first trimester. And the last 3 months of pregnancy, I mean, at least the last 2, you just can't, it's very uncomfortable, and the baby takes off all the space and you can't really do. And so in these 2 very different parts of pregnancy, these women are bonding together. Virginia Theological Seminary has this gorgeous statue of Mary and Elizabeth. As you look at the statue, you know that these are 2 women of color and that they are standing looking at each other. And Elizabeth has her hand on, is looking at her and has her hand on Mary's shoulder, looking with such compassion into Mary. And Mary is standing there looking at her like, oh, you've got to give me some wisdom here. And I spent hours in Virginia looking at that statue, just absorbing the relationship between these 2 women. It says that Mary spent 3 months with Elizabeth. I think in my story, I think that Mary was getting trained as to what the end of pregnancy and birth was going to look like for her. I think that she was there at the end of Elizabeth's pregnancy so that she would know what was going to be her path in 6 to 9 months. How was she, that she would be conversant with birth, that she would know what was going to happen. I don't know if you all have already made that connection in that story, but that to me is my favorite part of the Mary and Elizabeth story. And the receptivity for me this week was getting that perspective because of the podcast and because of the Little Women movie. It shifted my pondering. It shifted my wondering. So I wonder now with you all, what do you think about Mary and Elizabeth? What kinds of things have caught your attention? I got the feedback this week that sometimes it's hard to think about it and type it in the comments really quickly, and that I shouldn't get discouraged if I don't hear a lot, of the comments back. But I want you to think a little bit about, what do you love specifically about Mary? For me, it's the courage that it took for her to say yes, knowing that she was putting her own economics at risk. Yes, she said yes, and I can think about faith, but boy, that was really hard to do. So what do you love about Mary? Not only the Mary that gave birth, maybe the Mary that we've known through the gospel. Maybe you've had an experience with Mary. In The Secret Life of Bees, and Suzanne Ray says she likes The Secret Life of Bees, there is this wonderful adoration of Mary in this book, this wonderful relationship with Mary. Suzanne says her courage and choosing to be vulnerable. Yeah, her the divine feminine. Okay, I'm kind of hoping that all of you have near you a piece of paper and a pencil, or a pen, or a writing implement, because I want to teach you a really good way to get in touch with what you might know, what you might be thinking inside, but you don't know that you're thinking it. And Lynn, because you're a poet, I am going to apologize right up front, because this is not the way I'm sure that poets write. But I'm going to show you all an activity that you can take part in now, or you can do it when we're done in your own home. So I do this sometimes. You take a word and you put it down one side of the page, and then you sit for a minute and you write a little poem, and using those starting MARY. It's a really good way to crack open what you might be thinking about Mary. And I decided I would give you that assignment, but also I would do it ahead of time. So Mary, I wrote 2 poems. One is this: met with an angel, really afraid to say yes. Met with an angel, really afraid to say yes. That was my first poem. And then the second one I wrote was like a prayer to Mary. May you always guide my racing heart into your peacefulness. That was my second poem. So I wonder what you would write if you were going to write a poem about Mary. What do you think? You can write a poem about Elizabeth, but there's a lot of letters. So I thought I'd give you the Mary option first. I wanted, because Suzanne talked about it, Sue Ray talked about it, I do want to finish up by talking about the divine feminine. For those of us who spend a lot of time in scripture, it's really hard to find stories that are just about women. And what I love about Advent is that it feels like a really feminine season of the year to me. And it helps me to have one story like the Mary and Elizabeth story, where I don't have to excavate what might be the application out of scripture that's often written by men about men with men as the main protagonists. It can get exhausting being a woman, being a man, and only have the story come from the eyes of the structure of a society where the economic and political power and the storytelling is about the men and the male culture. It's hard to find the applications sometimes. It's hard to constantly be doing the translating. And I think one of the things that I want us to have permission to do in our wondering and in our pondering is to give ourselves permission to always look for the divine wisdom from the feminine side of the equation. The last master's degree that I did in Spanish literature, and I wrote a thesis called The Prostitute as Spiritual Guide. And I looked at 15th century literature that was only written by men in a very misogynistic society. And I looked for the wisdom in the female characters. And because we're here on this site and we're talking about God and mysticism and wondering, I want to encourage all of us to not be afraid to be frustrated in our wondering, but to always ask, what is the deeper story that I can go to here? How can I balance out both that which seems to be very male oriented with that which is more of a feminine characteristic? I talked about receptivity, and what are the characteristics tend to be more feminine that we sometimes don't have access to? And that's why I love Mary and Elizabeth, because it's right there. Okay, it's almost time for me to be done. I feel like I did a lot of talking today. This is a really heart subject for me, Mary and Elizabeth, and how much I love them. And I hope that you will do what the little tagline says: receptivity involves the heart. Next week, we get to talk about incarnation, which is really fun too. So thank you for joining me and us, and we will see you next week.